Good evening, and welcome once again to another gripping episode of The Last Clue story. We hope you and your loved ones are safe, healthy, and surrounded by peace. It all began when, one after another, 13 lives were brutally taken, sending a wave of fear and disbelief across the city. Who was behind these cold-blooded killings? Who was this remorseless serial killer lurking in the shadows? The first breakthrough came on October 13, 1972, when a single name surfaced: Lawrence. Yet even then, the real reason behind the string of murders remained buried in mystery. The police pressed on with their investigation, and just 11 days later, on October 24, 1972, yet another shocking revelation surfaced. On that very day, a young man entered a quiet church and made his way to Father Henry. Churches are often seen as sanctuaries where people confess their wrongdoings, sins, mistakes, even crimes, seeking redemption and forgiveness. It's in these sacred moments that the truth is often laid bare, as guilt and conscience drive a person to finally speak from a heart and confront what they've done. Normally, during confession, the father and the one confessing remain unseen to each other, preserving anonymity so that the person can speak openly without fear of being judged. On this day, that same anonymous man stepped inside the church and approached Father Henry quietly. In a calm yet unsettling tone, he said, "Father, I've committed a grave sin. Over the past 15 days, I've taken 2 lives." Father Henry, maintaining his composure, responded, "What you've done is deeply wrong, but your willingness to admit it shows there's still room for redemption. The path to repentance is not closed to you." The man simply nodded and whispered, "I will." Days passed. November 2nd came and went, followed by the entire month of December. The police continued their search across different locations, beginning to hope that the storm had passed and things were finally settling. But that fragile calm lasted barely a month and a half. A new year had arrived, 1973. Then came January 25, a date that would soon be etched into the history of the San Francisco Police Department. On that single day, January 25, officers uncovered a horrifying truth: 5 dead bodies, all found one after the other, shaking the city to its core. All 5 bodies were uncovered on that same chilling day. 2 were found at separate locations, both women, both victims of multiple stab wounds. At yet another scene, officers discovered the lifeless bodies of a woman and her 2 small children. Then came February 6, another grim milestone. On that day, too, 5 more corpses surfaced, again spread across 2 different sites. This time, all the victims were young men. 4 of them had been mercilessly gunned down, while one met an even more savage fate: beaten with a baseball bat, stabbed repeatedly, and then shot right in the street. There remains some uncertainty about one of the individuals or a possible mix-up in the total count, but the sheer brutality left no doubt about the killer's intent. What made the situation even more disturbing was that no individual or group came forward to claim responsibility for the murders. Following the killings of the young men, the police heightened their vigilance, and the investigation took a darker turn. This was now beginning to resemble the twisted work of a deranged serial killer. With the body count rising to 12, the city was gripped by fear, yet the killer remained a ghost. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no leads. Even more puzzling, investigators couldn't find any solid link between the victims. They had all been murdered, but there was no obvious connection tying them together. In response, the department deployed its most skilled detectives and launched an aggressive effort to solve the case before more blood was shed. That's when a crucial observation came to light. One of the hallmark behaviors of serial killers is that they often choose victims with whom they share no personal connection. The attacks are typically abrupt, highly violent, and appear entirely random. Then came February 13. That day, a man was gunned down in a narrow alley. As fate would have it, a few nearby residents heard the gunfire and rushed to see what had happened. They spotted a body on the ground, and just a short distance away, they noticed a young man calmly walking past. Police arrived swiftly and took the boy in for questioning. Whether he was the killer or simply a witness remained uncertain, and the fact that he didn't flee the scene only deepened the mystery. During questioning, the boy introduced himself as Herbal. He said he lived in a place called Artist, located just outside San Francisco, and claimed to be an engineering student currently studying there. Strangely, there were no other eyewitnesses around. No one else had seen what happened, only him. Every word he spoke was carefully documented by the officers. But as the police listened and tried to piece together the strange, inconsistent details of his story, the sense of doubt began to creep in. His answers didn't quite add up. Eventually, one of the detectives asked directly, "Why did you kill him? What was the motive? What did he do to you?" And without hesitation, the boy said, "I didn't even know him. I held no grudge at all. I knew who he was. But this wasn't a murder. It was a true offering." He gave his life willingly, a selfless act meant to protect thousands of others. The boy explained, "I didn't take his life, he chose to give it. It was a sacrifice, guided by divine will." The officers listened closely, and the weight of his words left the room in uneasy silence. Then one of them responded, "If that's true, then you're not the first. Others have made such sacrifices too. That makes you the 13th. The boy looked at them and said, "You've caught me, but you must release me. If I remain here, this city will fall into ruin." Despite the strange warning, the officers continued the interrogation with calm persistence. The investigation began with a look into his past, revealing that his father, Martin William, had served as a decorated hero in World War II and lived with the family in San Francisco. Mull was born there on April 18, 1947, into what seemed to be a loving, stable household. But everything changed after the sudden death of a close friend, a loss that shook him to the core. It's difficult to grasp how deeply it affected him, but the impact was undeniable. Shortly afterward, he approached his parents and pleaded, "Please give me help." He was admitted to a hospital, underwent psychiatric treatment, and slowly began to show signs of improvement before being discharged. However, not long after, he began hearing strange, disturbing voices, whispers that filled him with fear and confusion, pulling him into a dark internal struggle. The voices grew so overwhelming that he eventually begged his parents to admit him back into the hospital for more treatment. But during this turbulent period, he also began experimenting with drugs, hoping for relief. Instead, the substances only worsened his mental state. Neither medication nor therapy seemed to make a lasting difference. Each time he received treatment, he would relapse shortly after being released. Over time, a disturbing belief took root in his mind. He became convinced that it was his responsibility to protect the city and its people. And in his delusion, he believed that in order to save the city, sacrifices were necessary. Soon, obsessive thoughts about an impending earthquake began to consume him. And as I mentioned earlier, Mull was born on April 18, 1947, the very same date as the catastrophic San Francisco earthquake of 1906. That date, April 18, holds a haunting significance in San Francisco's history, marking one of its most catastrophic tragedies. On April 18, 1906, the city was rocked by a massive earthquake, considered the deadliest it has ever faced, with an estimated 3,000 to 5,000 lives lost in the destruction. As Mull grew older and each birthday came around, the eerie coincidence of his birth date with that disaster began to weigh heavily on his mind. He became fixated on a single obsessive thought: how could he protect the city from facing such devastation again? And over time, a chilling voice began to echo inside his head, repeating the same haunting command: a sacrifice must be made, he became convinced that without offering sacrifices, the city would once again face a devastating fate, perhaps even total destruction. These disturbing thoughts began to consume him from within. During this period, another blow struck. One of his close friends died in a tragic road accident. Mull was unable to accept the loss. The reality of his friend's death shattered him. That's when the voices returned, louder and more persistent, urging him to take action. At the same time, an eerie coincidence unfolded. A mathematician in San Francisco publicly predicted in 1972 that a massive earthquake would hit the city on January 4th, 1973, eerily mirroring the catastrophic quake of 1906. The prediction warned of immense devastation, a disaster that could level the city. Eventually, that chilling forecast reached the ears of Herbert Mullin. It was 1972 when a mathematician claimed that a powerful earthquake would strike on January 4th, 1973. That date burned itself into Herbert's mind. At the same time, the voices he had been hearing grew more intense, repeating the same terrifying message. An earthquake was coming. The city would be reduced to rubble, but there was a way to prevent it. The voices urged him, "You can stop this, but only if you do the work." And what was that so-called work? Human sacrifice. Take a few lives, they whispered, and you could save thousands. By August and September of 1972, Herbert was completely engulfed by the belief that it was his duty to save the city. Every waking moment, his mind was trapped in this dark obsession. Eventually, he made a chilling decision. He would act, believing it was the only way to prevent disaster. But in reality, it was nothing more than a horrifying delusion born from his deteriorating mental state. On October 13, 1972, he committed his first murder. Just 11 days later, on October 24, he struck again. After those two killings, a flicker of doubt crept in. Perhaps what he was doing wasn't right after all. Seeking some kind of redemption, he entered a church and poured out his confession to a priest. He told the priest that he constantly heard voices, relentless, commanding whispers that insisted he had to sacrifice people to save the city from an impending earthquake. In his mind, this was the only way to stop the catastrophe. But even after confessing, even in his state of confusion, the darkness within him resurfaced. Whether it was insanity, hallucination, or those haunting voices, no one could say for certain. Then came a terrifying shift in his thoughts. He began to believe that even the priest was silently offering himself for the cause, that he, too, was ready to be sacrificed. And in that twisted moment of delusion, Herbert killed the priest right there inside the church. Not long after, on January 25, 1973, he went on to murder 5 more people in a single day. Among the 5 people he killed that day were his own friend and the friend's wife, people who had once welcomed him into their home and offered him shelter for a long time. But over time, Herbert's twisted thoughts convinced him that their sacrifice was essential for his so-called greater mission. So he turned on them and took their lives. Another victim was a college student, a young woman he saw as kind-hearted, innocent, and pure. In his distorted reality, he believed she was a valuable part of society, someone whose symbolic sacrifice would protect many others. He even convinced himself that she would have willingly given her life for such a cause. Driven by that delusion, he murdered her too. Among the victims was also a woman and her 2 young children, individuals he believed were ideal sacrifices for his so-called divine mission. There was no personal animosity, no history of conflict. In his mind, he was certain that God had chosen and sent them directly to him for this purpose. One by one, he continued his killing spree. When the police finally caught him, he pleaded, "Let me go." He described everything, the voices in his head that guided his actions, the orders he believed were coming from a higher power. "Please," he said, "my mission isn't finished. As long as the voices speak to me, I have no choice but to continue. If I stop, the city will be destroyed by an earthquake. Of course, no rational person will believe such claims, but sometimes reality delivers such bizarre twists that even the impossible begins to seem eerily plausible. After his arrest on February 13, 1973, something strange happened. Exactly 8 days later, an earthquake hit San Francisco. While the quake wasn't powerful and caused little to no serious damage, the fact that it occurred at all unsettled many. As soon as it happened, he turned to the police and said, "See, you stopped me, interrupted my mission, and now the earthquake has come." He warned them again, saying, "Release me, or something far worse is coming. A much bigger quake is on its way. Only I can stop it. The higher power has chosen me," he insisted. "I must carry out the sacrifices. I must take lives, and only then can the earthquake be prevented." It became clear to the police that his mental state was far from stable. He was sent for a psychological evaluation, which uncovered some surprising details. He had once been among the brightest students in his college, with no history of criminal behavior or legal trouble. During the investigation, he even declared, "I don't need a lawyer." But the court saw clear signs of deep psychological disturbance and came to the conclusion that they couldn't fully grasp what was truly unfolding in his mind. Later, to ensure he had a fair chance to defend himself, even though the trial went forward against his wishes, the prosecution presented solid evidence for 10 of the 13 murders. The remaining 3 couldn't be conclusively proven by the police. Based on the confirmed charges, Herbert Mullin was sentenced to life in prison. Following the verdict, he was transferred to a state correctional facility in California. Today, he is believed to be in his early to mid-70s, possibly around 75 years old, and he remains behind bars to this day. This case became one of the first in California, and possibly in the entire United States, where a person claimed that voices in his head were warning him about an impending earthquake and that only human sacrifices could save the city and its people. That brings us to the end of today's story. If today's story gave you chills, then believe me, this is just the beginning. The Last Clue brings you true stories every week. Real, disturbing, and drawn straight from the darkest corners of the human mind. If you're someone who's fascinated by true crime, psychological thrillers, and unsolved mysteries, then hit that subscribe button right now. Because the next story might be the one that keeps you up at night. Subscribe because the truth won't wait. I'll return next time with another gripping and unforgettable tale. Until then, take care of yourself and your loved ones and stay safe. Thank you very much.